They didn't lose a partner. They lost the only safety net that ever truly protected them from their own emptiness. And the silence that follows is terrifying. Most people think a narcissist just shrugs and moves on when you walk away. But behind closed doors, the reality of what they actually did to someone who genuinely loved them triggers a very specific, quiet kind of panic. Think about the person who stayed through the chaos, the empty promises, and the endless cycles. When that person finally walks away for good, the playbook breaks. Drop a comment below if you've ever wondered what goes through their mind when the supply permanently dries up. Let's break down the exact psychological phases of how they change when they realize you are never coming back. When a narcissist finally realizes they have lost someone who genuinely loved them, the event does not trigger normal, healthy grief. Instead, it sparks what psychologists call a profound narcissistic injury. To understand this, we have to look closely at how a narcissistic mind processes human connection. For a person with high narcissistic traits, others are not viewed as independent human beings with their own internal worlds, feelings, and autonomy. Rather, they are viewed as functional extensions of the self, objects meant to provide emotional regulation, admiration, validation, and a sense of safety from a deep underlying core of shame and emptiness. Because of this transactional framework, the departure of someone who offered unconditional love is fundamentally catastrophic, but not for the reasons a healthy person might expect. A healthy person mourns the loss of shared history, mutual dreams, and the warmth of another's soul. A narcissist, however, mourns the loss of a utility, the realization that the source of unearned grace, patience, and devotion has permanently dried up, shatters the fragile, inflated ego they have worked so hard to construct. It forces them, if only for a fleeting, agonizing second, to peer past the grandiosity and glimpse the hollow, vulnerable core beneath it. This injury immediately triggers an intense defense mechanism, because acknowledging personal fault, cruelty, or neglect would mean confronting their own deep-seated inadequacy. The mind violently rejects the truth of the situation. They cannot process the reality that their toxic behavior drove away a rare, irreplaceable gift. Instead of feeling remorse, sadness, or empathy for the pain they caused, they experience a toxic cocktail of humiliation, disorientation, and unexpressed rage. The grief is entirely narcissistic. It is sorrow for themselves, for their wounded pride, and for the sudden inconvenience of having lost an indispensable cushion against their inner void. They are grieving the loss of their favorite mirror, crying over the broken tool rather than the person who held it. This initial reaction sets the stage for every defensive phase that follows, ensuring that accountability is entirely bypassed in favor of self-preservation and psychological distortion. The stage of disbelief and shock is the immediate psychological shield that deploys the moment a narcissist realizes the person who truly loved them has walked out the door for good. Because a narcissistic personality operates on an entrenched framework of grandiosity and inflated self-importance, the concept that someone would willingly and permanently abandon them is completely incomprehensible. In their distorted worldview, they are the prize, the center of the universe, and the ultimate catch. Therefore, when faced with an actual departure, their brain experiences a massive cognitive error. They simply cannot compute that their charm, manipulation, and presence were insufficient to keep someone tethered to them. This inability to process reality forces the mind to default to a state of profound shock, where denial acts as a temporary painkiller against the impending collapse of their ego. During this phase, they genuinely convince themselves that the breakup, the silence, or the boundary is just a temporary phase, a bluff, or a dramatic gesture that will soon blow over. They assume the person is sitting at home, waiting for them to reach out, fully expecting that a single text, a casual smile, or a breadcrumbing gesture will instantly reset the dynamic back to the status quo. This misplaced confidence stems from a deep-seated addiction to their own narrative of dominance. They believe they hold all the cards, and the idea that someone has revoked their power is too terrifying to acknowledge consciously. As the days stretch into weeks and the silence from the former partner remains unbroken, this initial shock begins to curdle. The disbelief shifts from a calm, arrogant assumption of return into a frantic, internal cognitive dissonance. They look at their phone, check for signs of life, and cycle through confusion because their predictable playbook has completely failed them. They are trapped in a vacuum where their grandiosity tells them they are irreplaceable, yet the physical reality staring them in the face proves that someone looked past their facade and chose peace instead of them. This gap between their inflated self-image and the humiliating truth creates a volatile psychological pressure cooker, laying the groundwork for the inevitable transition into explosive rage, blame shifting, and desperate attempts to claw back control before the reality of their loss becomes permanent. When the initial phase of shock and disbelief finally wears off, and the undeniable reality of the permanent loss sets in, The narcissist experiences a volatile psychological shift directly into rage and blame. Because their fragile internal structure cannot tolerate the burden of self-reflection, accountability, or the admission of failure, they bypass any genuine introspection entirely, admitting that their own cruelty, neglect, or manipulation drove away someone who genuinely loved them would mean confronting a core sense of worthlessness and inadequacy, which is a state their mind views as entirely fatal. To protect their inflated self-image from this catastrophic collapse, the defense mechanism of projection instantly takes over, violently flipping the script to cast themselves as the victim and the former partner as the villain. The narrative is rewritten in real time, transforming the person who offered endless patience, forgiveness, and unconditional love into a toxic, abusive, or unreasonable adversary who was supposedly holding them back all along. This sudden surge of rage is fueled by the humiliation of having their power rejected and their grandiosity challenged. They feel deeply wronged, not because they miss the human being, but because a boundary was successfully set against them. Consequently, they launch into a campaign of smear tactics, passive-aggressive retaliation, and externalized anger, venting their internal frustration onto anyone who will listen in order to manufacture a supportive chorus that validates their distorted version of events. Every flaw the former partner ever possessed is magnified, weaponized, and broadcasted to the world, while their own devastating contributions to the relationship are entirely erased from memory. This defensive wrath acts as an emotional armor, insulating them from the agonizing truth of their own behavior and ensuring that they can walk away feeling righteous and justified, completely shielding themselves from the pain of remorse, while leaving the destruction squarely in the wake of their refusal to change. When the dust of initial rage and denial settles, and the terrifying realization sets in that the person who truly loved them is genuinely gone for good, the narcissist enters a state of raw desperation, triggering the phase known as hoovering. This behavior is driven entirely by panic over the permanent rupture of a reliable emotional supply line and the sudden glaring exposure of their own inner emptiness. Because they view human connections as functional utilities rather than bonds between equals, losing someone who offered unconditional acceptance, loyalty, and patience feels like losing a vital life support system. They are not panicking because they miss the soul, the laughter, or the authentic partnership of the individual. Rather, they are panicking because their mirror has shattered, and they are left staring face to face with the crushing weight of their own unmitigated failure. To remedy this crisis, their behavior shifts into overdrive, adopting tactics that can range from alarmingly sweet to aggressively manipulative. You might suddenly see an influx of deeply nostalgic messages, unsolicited apologies that sound profound but carry no actual accountability, or grand, sweeping declarations that they have completely changed overnight. If positive reinforcement fails, they may pivot instantly to manufacturing fake crises, feigning sudden illnesses, or creating synthetic emergencies designed explicitly to trigger your empathy and pull you back into their orbit. Every single action in this phase is a calculated or instinctively reactive bid to re-establish control and secure their favorite source of validation. They are desperately trying to suck you back into the vacuum of their dysfunction, because the alternative, living with the fact that someone saw right through their mask and chose to walk away anyway, is psychologically intolerable. Yet, even during these frantic attempts to draw you back, their underlying motivation remains entirely self-serving. They are attempting to patch up a leaking boat with tape, hoping that if they can just pull you across the threshold one more time, they can restore the illusion of their own superiority without ever having to do the hard, humbling work of genuine personal growth. If this is hitting home and you are trying to heal from the fog of a toxic dynamic, hit that subscribe button right now. We unpack these patterns every week so you can protect your peace and never look back. When the frantic attempts at hoovering ultimately fail, and the door is permanently shut by the person who once loved them, the narcissist faces an ego injury so profound that their mind must resort to the ultimate psychological self-defense: the fabrication of a completely false narrative. Because acknowledging that they drove away a loyal, loving partner through their own malice or neglect would shatter their fragile grandiosity. Their psyche instantly rewrites history to protect their self-image. They cannot live in a reality where they are the villain of the story, so they construct an elaborate, fictionalized version of the past where they were the long-suffering victim and the former partner was the toxic, abusive, or unstable force holding them back. In this fabricated script, every act of patience, every sacrifice, and every tear shed by the person who loved them is recontextualized as manipulation, control, or madness. They convince themselves and anyone in their flying monkey network who will listen that they bravely escaped a toxic dynamic, turning the truth completely on its head. This revisionist history is not merely a lie they tell others to save face. It is a psychological survival mechanism. By casting the former partner as the aggressor, they effectively neutralize any lingering feelings of guilt, shame, or accountability before those emotions can even breach their consciousness. They cleanse themselves of all wrongdoing, transforming a devastating loss into a triumphant narrative of liberation. This fake reality allows them to sleep at night, shielding their hollow core from the agonizing awareness that they threw away a rare and precious diamond because they lacked the emotional capacity to cherish it. Through this elaborate mental gymnastics, the narcissist ensures that they remain flawless, righteous, and completely insulated from the painful, transformative truth of their own destructive patterns. When the smoke clears from the fabricated narratives and the desperate attempts to regain control, any outward display of sadness or mourning from a narcissist is revealed to be entirely performative, rooted in what psychologists call imposter self-pity. If you happen to catch a glimpse of their tears, hear about their melancholic social media posts, or listen to them lament about how hard things have been, it is easy to mistake this behavior for genuine heartbreak or remorse. However, a closer look at their emotional architecture reveals that they are not mourning the loss of the human being who loved them, nor are they grieving the shared memories, the laughter, or the deep emotional bond that has been broken. Instead, they are intensely mourning the loss of comfort, status, adoration, and the unparalleled utility that the former partner provided. They miss the person who cleaned up their messes, absorbed their toxic emotional dumping, excused their bad behavior, and treated them like a god despite their flaws. Their grief is entirely self-centered, focusing strictly on how inconvenient, humiliating, and uncomfortable their current reality is now that their primary source of validation has been permanently revoked. It is the equivalent of a child throwing a tantrum, not because a cherished pet has run away, but because their favorite, most convenient toy has been taken out of the playroom. This performative sorrow is often weaponized to elicit sympathy from new audiences, painting themselves as the tragic, misunderstood romantic who was abandoned by someone they supposedly cared for. Behind closed doors, once the audience disappears, the sadness evaporates just as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a cold, transactional calculation of how to fill the empty space they are experiencing. They cannot access deep empathic sorrow because the emotional circuitry required to miss someone for who they are rather than for what they did for them simply does not exist within their internal framework, leaving their grief to ring hollow, superficial, and entirely manufactured for the sole purpose of feeding their insatiable ego.